David from Billings, Montana asks, do you think another downgrade is coming for the U.S.?
Well, first of all, the U.S. government has filed a lawsuit against S&P, which was the last of the major rating agencies to downgrade them. There was this smaller one, Egan-Jones, which had downgraded the U.S. Treasury, and the U.S. government has now banned them from grading government debt. So I would say the likelihood is practically zero that the U.S. government will be downgraded. They certainly let it be known what the penalty is if you downgrade the U.S. Treasury. In fact, I doubt that S&P will be doing any further downgrades. I think they've probably been effectively intimidated. Certainly Moody's or Fitch, I don't think they're going to downgrade. So maybe there might be some international rating agencies that have nothing to do with the U.S. that might downgrade the U.S. Treasury, but none of the U.S. Rating agencies will do it. But that doesn't mean anything in the scheme of things. Anybody who believes these ratings probably deserves to lose their money by buying these bonds. You have to look at these ratings with a grain of salt. Remember, the government creates a cartel with the rating agencies in which only these agencies that the government approves are allowed to rate the bonds, and then the government actually requires that if you're a pension fund or a government fund and you buy these bonds, you can only buy bonds that are rated by their approved agencies. So the whole thing is a fix from the beginning. The whole process has been corrupted by government. And so as far as I'm concerned, the ratings are meaningless anyway. And U.S. government debt is in effect junk. And I think if you buy it, you will lose. You will either lose because the government defaults, or you will lose because you get repaid in money of diminished value. So either way, I don't think that you want to buy the bonds. It doesn't matter what S&P or Moody's says. And if they do ever get around to downgrading, believe me, by the time they do, it'll be too late to sell. You would have probably already lost most of your purchasing power.
Derek from Mercer Island, Washington asks, is buying into international ETFs or mutual funds enough to protect that money from a falling dollar? Or do you need to somehow get your money out of the U.S. and buy foreign stocks and funds?
Well, it all depends on the particular ETF or mutual fund that you're buying. You have to take a look at what they're doing with their foreign exchange risk. Some funds might hedge that out. So even if you are invested in foreign securities, foreign bonds, you might be hedged back into the U.S. dollar. So assuming you do your homework and you find out that the vehicle is unhedged, then you still want to do a little bit more homework and see exactly what they do own. If it's a bond fund, it's pretty simple. You can look at the bonds, the countries, the average maturity. My advice is to keep maturities very low right now because I do believe that rates are headed higher pretty much across the globe, so you don't want to necessarily lock yourselves in to a situation where you've got long-term debt. But when it comes to stock mutual funds, it's a little bit more different because you want to look at the companies, the top holdings, and where those countries generate their revenue. Because it's possible you can invest in a foreign company where most of their revenues are in America, so they're earning dollars even though the company might be incorporated in Australia. So you really got to look at the particular types of companies and where they generate their income, and is the investment vehicle hedged to the dollar or not. But in general, you want to buy the unhedged ones if you want to get out of the dollar, and you want to own mutual funds or ETFs that have companies that generate their earnings outside the United States. And if you do that, yes, you will be getting out of the U.S. dollar because you'll have non-dollar denominated assets where you have dividend streams or income payments coming to you in U.S. dollars. We have investment products that I offer at Euro Pacific Capital that also cover that. So you might want to call a broker at Euro Pacific Capital. You can go to our the website of my management company as well, and at EuroPacificFunds.com, I think, and you can look at some of the vehicles that we have. Download a prospectus, see if it's suitable for you. Take a look at the risk, make sure that you're comfortable with the risks. But there are a lot of ways to get out of the dollar. And the most important thing is that you do get out of the dollar, I think. I think it's a sinking ship. And rather than go down with it, look for a life vote that you can use to protect yourself.
Gonzalo in Mexicali, Baja, California asks, Peter, would you please give me a scholarship for my university?
I doubt it. I don't know what university you want to go to or why I should be offering a scholarship. I'm not. You might want to get a scholarship from that university. A lot of colleges offer scholarships to promising students. Sometimes they're means related. Sometimes they're not. Sometimes they're academic. So if you're looking for a scholarship, I would suggest contacting whatever university or college you're trying to attend to see what kind of scholarship programs you may be able to qualify for.
Enrique from San Francisco, California asks, the rent is very high here in San Francisco. If I have no cash flow, should I rent a home or should I try to buy a property?
I'm not really sure I understand. You have no cash flow. Does that mean you don't have a job? And if you don't have a job, how is it that you're paying rent? And where is the money coming from to buy this piece of property? What would you have to sell, or is it a situation where you don't have to put any money down? There are a lot of variables that I don't have, so it's hard for me to give you any real advice, other than the fact that in general, I think real estate is still overpriced, particularly in California. And you're up in the Bay Area, it is a very pricey market. I understand that rents are also pretty pricey. So either way, you're going to have to spend a lot of money on housing. But I still don't think it makes sense for a lot of people to buy. I think that you'll lose less if you rent. But I don't know what your circumstances are. You're married, you have kids. How stable is your job? If you have one, are you planning on moving? But I think California is in trouble. They've just raised taxes. They now have the highest income tax in the state. You have a supermajority in California of Democrats. Who knows what type of economically destructive legislation might be passed by the state legislature. Governor Jerry Brown signs it into law. So I think people are leaving the state of California despite all that it has going for it. Naturally, it's climate and what the state has to offer naturally is great, but the government is taking away a lot of those advantages and creating a lot of incentives for businesses to leave the state, and certainly they've put in a lot of barriers. I can't imagine any business relocating to California, so that's going to make the employment situation more difficult, and that's not good for the housing market. So I would be very reluctant to buy real estate in California. I would continue renting, and maybe if you find that rents are high, maybe you get a roommate, maybe you look for a less expensive location from which to rent, or maybe you actually leave California. Go to one of the states that doesn't have an income tax. They also tend to have lower rents and lower property values, so you might be able to have come out ahead on multiple fronts.
Stephen from Northland, New Zealand asks, we currently have a manufacturing sector which is struggling because of the high dollar. Our government is currently following free market principles, but has indicated that it will give our Federal Reserve Bank greater powers to intervene in order to reduce the value of the dollar. How can a vibrant and productive manufacturing sector coexist with a high and constantly rising dollar?
Well, to the extent that there's a manufacturer that's having trouble, it's not because of the strong New Zealand dollar. It's easy to say, well, we can sell more if we lower our prices, which is all that happens when your currency goes down in value. The problem is some of your customers, if they're in America, because the New Zealand dollar is rising against the US dollar. It's not rising dramatically against the Australian dollar. It's been rising a little bit recently, but it had fallen against the Aussie dollar. It's still, I'm not sure if it's it's not at a historic strong point, as a matter of fact. I think the Australian dollar is worth about $1.04, $1.05, the New Zealand dollar about 84 cents, 85 cents. So it's a pretty healthy premium. I've seen it where that difference was less than a dime in the past. Other Asian currencies have been strong as well. So obviously the New Zealand dollar is rising against the U.S. dollar, but the bottom line is it's because Americans are poor. If you've got a business in New Zealand, yeah, they might suffer to the extent that they had a lot of customers in America, and now those customers are broke and they can't afford to buy the products anymore. That doesn't mean that the New Zealand people should loan Americans the money by having their government undermine their own currency, create inflation so that the New Zealand dollar can be debased along with the US dollar. And again, ultimately, the goal of exports is to import. And that goal is more easily accomplished when you have a strong currency, because you don't have to export as much to pay for the imports that you desire. But your question about how can a vibrant economy or industrial economy coexist with a strong currency, it's easy. I mean, the United States did it. Look at Germany. Germany's had a strong currency, and they've had a vibrant economy. They had a stronger currency before they had the euro and they had the Deutschmark. But look at all the manufacturing. Look at all the exports that happened into Germany in the 80s and the 90s when the Deutschmark was strengthening. The same thing with the Japanese yen. When the Japanese yen was strengthening during the 70s and the 80s, and the Japanese economy flourished. Their exports were strong. The same thing in America. When we were leading the world in exports, and we export a lot of manufactured products, those products were the best value. They were the lowest priced, even though we had a strong currency, and even though we paid high real wages, much higher than we do today. Remember, you have a lot of benefits from a strong currency that help manufacturers. They keep their raw material costs down. That gives them an advantage. Energy is cheaper. Metals are cheaper. Also, if you have a strong currency, capital wants to invest in your country. People are encouraged to save, which means you have a natural advantage, a competitive advantage in capital. You have more abundant capital, you have a lower cost of capital. That's what really helped the United States. We had a lot of savings and investment because we had a strong currency. So if you have a strong currency, if your government pursues sound monetary policy and sound fiscal policy, which is the only way you're going to have a strong currency, then manufacturers will benefit by having cheaper, more abundant sources of capital. I'm talking about legitimate capital that comes from savings, not the phony capital that comes from a printing press, because that's just inflation. And of course, if you have a strong currency, your employees don't have to, go on strike to get higher wages, because the wages that they're earning are giving them a higher standard of living. Real wages are rising when you have a strong currency. You can even reduce wages, and your employees might be better off because the things that they have to buy are that much less expensive, because you don't have any inflation. You have a sound currency. You're able to import cheaper. And of course, you'll also find that countries that have sounder currencies, that are not trying to rely on inflation to try to compete, their companies are likely to be more innovative. They feel the competition, the competitive threat. They're on their toes better. They're doing more to try to keep their costs down, to be as efficient as possible, so they can still maintain their market share. I think when you succumb to trying to maintain market share by debasing your currency, you just end up giving away your products, and the country has less to show for it. Maybe you import more. Maybe if the New Zealand dollar went down, you can import more New Zealand dollars, but you need all of them because to buy all to buy all the things that are produced in other countries. So if you sell more goods abroad, but you earn more New Zealand dollars that have less value, well, now you have to acquire a yen, or you have to acquire euros or other currencies to buy the things that you need, and now you have to work that much harder. You have to export that much more to import the things that you really want. That's why you're exporting. That's why any country exports. They export surplus production that they don't need, so they can import production that they do need, but that their own industries did not have a comparative advantage in manufacturing. And history is replete with examples of countries with sound currencies and strong exports, and vice versa. Generally, they go hand in hand. This whole idea that the key to exporting is having a weak currency is nonsense. There are plenty of countries that have destroyed their currency, and it hasn't helped build up their manufacturing sector, but it has impoverished their people.